This video is going to be about run-on sentences and comma splices. What is a run-on sentence? A run-on sentence is when you connect two or more independent clauses in one sentence with only a comma. How do you fix a run-on sentence? A run-on sentence can be fixed by inserting a semicolon or by inserting a comma and or a coordinating conjunction. What is a comma splice? A comma splice is when you connect two or more independent clauses in one sentence with only a comma. How do you fix a comma splice? You can fix a comma splice by adding a coordinating conjunction after the comma or by replacing the comma with a semicolon. There is a third option that Sean, the teacher in the video, does not mention. We can also just make the two independent clauses separate sentences by inserting a period and after the first independent clause and then capitalizing it, and starting the second independent clause with a capital letter. Here is an example of a run-on sentence. Albert Einstein was born in Germany, and then it has a comma, all right? And so he became a citizen in 1940. So that's a run-on sentence. And so you'll correct it by putting a period, a semicolon, or a comma, or a coordinating conjunction. So here you have a run-on sentence. Albert Einstein was born in Germany, comma, he became a U.S. citizen in 1940. And so here you have a run-on sentence, and that means that you have an unnecessary comma over here. And so in order to fix the run-on sentence, you either put a period between the two sentences, or you put a semicolon between the two sentences, or you put a comma and a coordinating conjunction. So that's basically what 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 was saying. Here is another example in which it says, this is incorrect. Einstein developed the most famous formula, comma, it says E = mc squared. So you have another unnecessary comma. Correct would be Einstein developed the most famous formula, so you could either put a period, a semicolon, or you can have a coordinating conjunction with a comma, okay? So I can say something like, if I were to do this, okay, and I go like this, and instead of the semicolon, if I put a comma, and it says E = mc squared. So those are the ways in which you can correct a comma splice, or a run-on sentence. Here's an example of a correct sentence because the sentence ends in a period and a comma is used when a relative clause is used. Einstein received the 1921 Nobel Prize in Physics for his work in physics. And so here you have a comma because whenever you have a relative clause, you need to have a comma, which led to the quantum theory. Okay, and then here is an example of an unnecessary comma. So whenever you have an unnecessary comma, then it's a comma splice. He is a favorite model for depictions of mad scientists and absent-minded professors. His expressive face and distinctive hairstyle have been widely copied and exaggerated. And so he is a favorite model for depictions of mad scientists and absent-minded professors. This should be a period over here, okay? And so this is a comma splice because you're supposed to have, whenever you have two sentences together with an unnecessary comma, that's a run-on sentence and it is a comma splice. So therefore, the way you can fix it is you can put a period between the two sentences, or just like up here, you can put a period between the two sentences, or you can have a semicolon between the two sentences, or you can have a comma and a coordinating conjunction. So those are the three ways that you can correct a comma splice. He is, and here I corrected, he is a favorite of depiction. He is a favorite for depictions of mad scientists and absent-minded professors, semicolon. Or you can have a period and a coordinating conjunction. Either way, okay, you can correct it, but you're not supposed to have an unnecessary comma, and that makes it a comma splice. Here's an example of another, this is another run-on sentences. Albert Einstein was a German-born theoretical physicist. And then here, you're missing. There's no, right here, you have to have a period because Albert Einstein was a physicist. Complete thought. So after a complete thought, you put a period. If you're missing your period, it's a run-on sentence, it's a comma splice. And so here, if you want to fix the comma splice, you either put a semicolon or you put a comma, and then it's correct. And so a semicolon and a coordinating conjunction. So here the coordinating conjunction is but. Remember that coordinating conjunction could be fanboys. Okay, it's for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So those are all coordinating conjunctions. And so whenever you use a comma and any of these coordinating conjunctions, then you can join two sentences together and it becomes a compound sentence. So that's what we studied in the previous quiz, was when you have fanboys connecting two sentences, then it is a compound sentence. So let's go to the fun part of testing what we just learned. So test your knowledge on run-on sentences and comma splices with the quiz below. When you score 100% on the practice quiz, you can take the quiz. What is a run-on sentence? Is it A, when you connect two or more sentences, two or more independent clauses in one sentence with only a comma? That's the correct one. Okay, when you join two sentences together with only a comma. So here, this was incorrect, is a comma splice. He is a favorite, and then here you have just a comma. There it is. See? There you've got the unnecessary comma, because he is a scientist or he is a professor. This is a complete thought. And when you have a complete thought, you have to put a period after it, not a comma. And so the first answer is when you join two sentences together with only a comma, that's a run-on sentence. How do you fix a run-on sentence? So check all that applies. Okay, so number 2 would be you insert a comma and a coordinating conjunction. So that's correct, A. You insert a semicolon, that's correct. You insert a conjunctive adverb. Okay, I forgot to mention that all of these are also known as conjunctive adverbs. Oops, okay, so that way you don't even know what that is. So this is a conjunctive adverb. And so the answer to number 2 should have more than one. Okay, so number 2 should be A, B, and C. Sorry, A, B, and D. All right, so I need to write that on my answer sheet. Yeah, A, B, and D. Insert a conjunctive adverb. What is a comma splice? So a comma splice is when you join two sentences together with no punctuation, or it has an unnecessary comma. So when you put two or more sentences, two or more independent clauses in one sentence without punctuation, when you connect two or more sentences with only a comma. Okay, so the first one is known as a run-on sentence. When you join two sentences together with no punctuation, that's a run-on sentence. But if you join two sentences together with a comma, that's known as a comma splice. So to make it clear, there is a difference between a run-on sentence and a comma splice. When we have a run-on sentence, we simply have two sentences that come together. So if I were to give an example, okay, so if I gave an example, a comma splice is something like, John is dumb. Mary is smart. Okay, that's a comma splice, because here you have an unnecessary comma here. You have to put a period here. A run-on sentence is something like this. John is dumb, Mary is smart. In other words, there's no punctuation whatsoever. That's a run-on sentence. A comma splice is when you have that unnecessary comma in the middle, and then a run-on sentence, simply there's just no punctuation whatsoever. That's the only difference. What they both have in common is that they're both wrong, and they're both the wrong punctuation for two different sentences. And then you have to fix it by putting a comma, insert a semicolon, or you put a comma and a conjunctive adverb or a coordinating conjunction. And by now that should all make sense. If not, you've got to restudy and go, what was that? And you have got to go and study it again. So a comma splice is when you connect two or more independent clauses with only a comma. In other words, that's wrong. So it's a B. How do you fix a comma splice? Here is the same thing. You add a you replace the comma with a semicolon. And so here, okay, so if I want to say John is dumb, semicolon, and then I have to go Mary is smart. So I corrected this mistake by adding a semicolon. So that's why the answer is D. And also you can have John is dumb, comma, and Mary is smart. So that's A and D. So add a coordinating conjunction after the comma. So here you can add a coordinating conjunction and, or you could have but, okay, instead of, that's changed instead of and all the time. But any of the fanboys matches, okay, any of the fanboys. So it can be and, but, or, nor, for, so, yet. And so those are known as coordinating conjunctions and also known as conjunctive adverbs. So you can fix it by A, add a coordinating conjunction and a comma, or D, add a, insert a semicolon. So those are the two ways that you can fix a comma splice. There is a third option that Sean, the teacher in the video, does not mention. We can also just make the two independent clauses separate sentences by inserting a period after the first sentence, and then starting the second sentence with a capital letter, true or false. True. I mean, that's so if I were to stick to, John is dumb, period. And then I capitalize Mary is smart. And that's it. So obviously the answer to number 5 is true. Imagine the essay. Imagine writing, okay, let's put all of this down here. Imagine writing an essay about the famous scientist Albert Einstein. Decide if the sentence below is a run-on sentence, a comma splice, or correct as is. And so here you have Albert Einstein was born in Germany. He became a U.S. citizen in 1940. And so here you have no punctuation at all. So remember that above here I said that the difference between a comma splice and a run-on sentence is that when you have a run-on sentence, no punctuation at all. A comma splice is when you have an unnecessary comma. So that's the difference between the two. And so here you have no punctuation whatsoever. So the answer is it's a run-on sentence. Okay, if I put a comma there, then it becomes a comma splice. Obviously, it's not correct as is, because whenever you have a complete thought, you have to put a period, or you insert a semicolon, or you put a comma and a conjunctive adverb or a coordinating conjunction. So this one is a run-on sentence. Imagine writing an essay about the famous scientist Einstein. So here you have Decide if the sentence below is a run-on sentence or a comma splice. Well, we know it's not correct as is because we have two sentences, and look at this, an unnecessary comma. So right away, we know that is a comma splice. A comma splice is when you have an unnecessary comma between two sentences. Imagine writing an essay about the famous scientist Albert Einstein. Decide if the sentence below is a run-on sentence, a comma splice, or correct as is. And so here you have a period. Oh, not a period, sorry. Here you have a relative clause. When we have not an unimportant relative clause at the end of a sentence, then we use a comma. For instance, if I said that John fixed the car, which is old, all right? And so here, which is old, is not really necessary to the sentence. So therefore, if you have a relative clause that's not necessary to the sentence, then we put a comma there. So therefore, this particular sentence is C, correct as is, because we do use the comma when we have a relative clause at the end of the sentence and it's not important. If this is important, John who wears a hat had his hair blown, the wig fell off or something, and you need to know, and there's 5 different John in the room, and you want to know which John are you talking about. Is the John the one that's wearing the hat, the John with the blue shirt, or the John with the long pants? So if it's really important, then we don't put a comma after the which. So this is known as restrictive and non-restrictive relative clauses. If you want to look it up, okay? If you want more about when to put a comma with relative clauses, you can Google restrictive and non-restrictive. I'll write that down. This is known as restrictive versus non-restrictive. It's known as either an adjective clause or a relative clause. Either one's the same thing, okay? Why is it known as an adjective clause? Because which is old describes the car, which said it's the same thing as John fixed the old car. John fixed the car, which is old. It's the same thing. And so if you want to learn more about how to use commas with which, then you can look up restrictive versus non-restrictive adjective or relative clauses. But that's basically what they're asking you here. And so here, since this is not important, okay, what's important is Einstein received his Nobel Peace Prize in physics, and then comma. Then later on, he did quantum physics, quantum theory, later on in his life, which led to. And so here you have a non-restrictive, so it's a non-restrictive clause. So anyway, you can learn all about that when you Google that. So the important thing is it's correct as is. So after you learn about this, you'll then understand why this is correct. Number 9, he is a favorite model for depictions of mad scientists and absent-minded professors. Comma. His expressive and distinctive hairstyle have been widely copied and exaggerated. The above is a comma splice. How can we fix it? And so here we have an unnecessary comma. So that is a comma splice. So how do we fix comma splices? And then you have to write down, check all that applies. And so by now, you should already know what it looks like. We can either insert a semicolon, or we can put a comma and a coordinating conjunction. You should know that, but you should know that really, really well by now. Okay, so you have a semicolon or a comma and a coordinating conjunction, also known as a conjunctive adverb. So that's 9 is A and C. 10. Albert Einstein was a German-born physicist. His work is also known for its influence on the philosophy of science. In this case, this is a run-on sentence because there's no punctuation over here. And so here, this is an example of a run-on sentence. How can we fix a run-on sentence? And as you can see here are all the answers, okay? So if you can score a 100% and it matches the answers, then you can get a really good grade. And so here, number 10, Albert Einstein was a German-born physicist. And so here, you add a semicolon. And that's one way to fix it. Another way to fix it is C. Always the comma comes first. Then you have your coordinating conjunction. Notice how they try to trick you over here by having the comma over here. That's not correct. You've always got to have the comma first. Then you write your coordinating conjunction. A lot of students make this mistake, actually. I see that when people write their essays. So it's always the comma comes first, then your coordinating conjunction. So either you fix a run-on sentence with a semicolon, or you put a comma and a coordinating conjunction. And then the one way that Sean does not mention in his video is you can also put a period between. I think that Sean doesn't mention that because that's so obvious. Everybody knows about the period. And so that's why he probably didn't mention it. That's my guess. Anyway, so when you can score 100% on this quiz, then you are ready to take when you can score 100% on the practice quiz, then you can take the regular quiz. So if you have any questions on the week 4 quiz, you can always email me.